Okay, let's open a word of prayer. Father, thank you for this day. We pray that you bless our time together. Just pray, Lord, that you will give us wisdom, guided by your Holy Spirit, on how to navigate a increasingly troubled world. Bless us today, in Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going to title this Disruption Upon Disruption. And just so you know, Pam and I are going to be traveling some over the next couple of weeks. So whether I do an update, a midweek update or an update next Sunday or the next 2 Sundays is going to be a little bit up in the air because our travel plans are not entirely set in stone. So today I'm titling this Disruption Upon Disruption, and you will see in a couple minutes where that comes from. As with most things that I do these days, it is almost impossible to keep up with the things that are happening in the world. But this title comes from a Financial Times article that I saw the other day, and some people call Financial Times and The Economist the tip sheet and the economic sheet for the party of Davos, which is the one that's doing this World Economic Forum and is pushing this Great Reset, which at this point certainly seems to be well underway. So here's some alternative channels where you can find things from Fellowship Bible Chapel. We're having trouble with Facebook today. And I don't know if you're like me, but I have a couple of Twitter accounts. John Haller 54 is my main one. I also have an FB Chapel one. But I'm constantly getting logged out of my Twitter accounts now. I mean, a couple times, sometimes a couple, 3 times a day. I don't use it that much. But with the security updates and everything that have been flying around, I don't know if it's that, or I don't know if somebody thinks that I should have to work hard to get on Twitter to say something. I don't know. So we're all being trained by our tech overlords to do things. There is an incredible convergence of events. I wish you would pray for me too. This week I'll be speaking at Liberty University Law School Chapel. I think I'm going to speak on the prophetic and legal case for the modern state of Israel. And we'll cover some topics there, some of the Bible, Old Testament prophecies, and then also some of the conferences that occurred literally just 100 years ago when the borders of the modern Middle East were set, which nobody pays attention to, but I'll talk about that in my talk. And that may or may not be posted. Depends on whether I can record it down at Liberty. But we certainly live in this very troubled time where everything seems to be converging. So let's get right into it. I'm going to look at just some economic things. So you're going to see these headlines everywhere. Britons to face higher taxes to pay for eco pledges. This week and for the starting Tuesday and for the next 12 or 13 days, they're having a big conference in Glasgow, Scotland, where they're going to be discussing how they're going to take everybody's money and tell them what to do over the next number of decades, or until, I'm sure this is going to exist until the Lord returns, unless there's some kind of big political overhaul of the elites that seem to be in charge. But these things that they want to do, zero carbon, I see that. I don't think I even have a slide on it. Saudi Arabia came out and pledged to be zero carbon by 2050 or 2060. This is the largest oil producer in the world. Well, at least now is. It used to be the United States until about a year ago when a certain regime took office in Washington, D.C. But there's a cost to this. You cannot shift the economy. I think Tucker Carlson on his Fox Nation show has a thing on windmills. These things, I see them around. We saw a lot of them when we were driving out west a few weeks ago. There's a place up around Van Wert, Ohio, where there's just dozens and dozens of these things populating the fields. And a lot of times they're never moving. They're damaging to the environment. They cost a lot of money to make. And when they fail, they can't be repaired. They have to be taken down and buried someplace, and they last in the ground for hundreds of years before, if not longer. You know, if the Lord doesn't come back for a long, long time, they will have archaeologists digging these things up someday and wonder what kind of civilization worshiped these giant propellers or something, because they're all over the place. They're like monuments. But it's going to cost, and so people are going to have to pay more taxes. You may have noticed that inflation seems to be going up. This is in part because of the supply chain disruptions. I think we're only at the beginning of this. I've seen numbers in the United States that they need 80,000 more truckers right now, and they can't find them. One of the things that's going on is what I would call the Great Resignation. In the United States over the last couple of months, there have been 25 million people that have just left the workforce. Now, a lot of those people have retired. They don't want to deal with it anymore. They're tired of all the rules and do this, don't do that. You have to wear this, don't wear this. Can't go here, you have to do this. And they're just tired of it, and they may have enough money saved up, they think, and they're just withdrawing from the workforce. But that increases labor shortages. How many times do you go to a restaurant now and find that there are a number of items on the menu that they just don't have? Or you go to a restaurant. I stopped by a fast food place the other day, and I've never seen a sign like this before, because fast food places, they open at 6 a.m., they close at midnight, some are open 24/7. This fast food place said, we will be closed from 1:30 to 2 o'clock every day for lunch. Just shut the whole drive-through and everything shut down in the middle of the day. It's just, these are things that we've never seen before, and there are a record number of ships waiting to be unloaded. There are tens of thousands of containers on those ships. They can't be unloaded, and everybody's blaming somebody else. Now, if you listen to the Biden regime, their chief of misinformation, Jen Psaki, will say, well, this is proof that the economy is growing because there's so many things waiting to be unloaded. But part of the problem is in the major ports in Los Angeles and Long Beach, which is the largest port complex in the United States, they can't unload the containers because there's no truckers to haul away the containers. And part of the reason there's no trucker to haul away the containers is California put into place rules that essentially independent truckers can't meet, and so therefore it's all shifted to corporations. It's just, the whole thing is insane. Here's the article in the Financial Times that I received. This is a picture of the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach and some of the container ships anchored off the coast. The other problem too is that they're not getting the containers back so they can go back to China or wherever it is to get the goods to bring back. There are other problems like Vietnam, which makes a lot of clothing now. They're shut down because of the virus. They're locked down. So this again from the Times of London, higher shop prices loom across the board. They interviewed the head of Unilever, a consumer products company, and they said this is a once in 20-year rise in prices. Now they avoid some of the inflation, they mask it because they don't include the cost of gas and some other things in the price of inflation. So if you don't want the inflation rate to go up, just take out the ones that are really hitting you. And everybody knows, I think it was a year and 3 months ago, I had a 10-cent off per gallon thing from a grocery chain, and I paid 92 cents for a gallon of gas in Springfield, Ohio. That's not what's happening now. It's $3.19 here most places, although if you're creative and with apps, I've been able to get it for $2.73 recently for regular. But this is going to happen, and it's happening all over the world. It's just not the United States. And as if we didn't have enough trouble with the oil supply right now. So here's what's happened. Saudi Arabia and the OPEC countries have cut back on oil production because they believe in the law of supply and demand. You cut down the supply, the price will go up. As the price of per barrel goes up, they make more money for their sovereign wealth funds and that sort of thing. Therefore, they can fund some of the social programs that they have in their country. This is particularly true with Saudi Arabia. Now the problem is, if you remember a year ago, demand had dropped, had bottomed out. And there's a choke point in the U.S. supply of gasoline and oil. And it's this, it's called Cushing, Cushing, Oklahoma. it has massive oil tanks all over the place, all over town, like giant oil tank farms. And it's where oil from Texas and else in refineries in South Texas and West Texas will transit through Cushing, Texas. So a year ago, what happened was nobody was buying oil. Oil demand had dropped because they had shut everything down. Well, Cushing started to fill up. And it got to the point where Cushing said, don't send any more oil. Don't even put it in the pipeline, thinking that you're going to be able to store it in the pipeline, because we're shutting it down. We're not taking any more oil. That caused a very severe disruption in the price of oil. If you remember, oil actually went negative for a short period of time. Well, now they have the storage facilities in Cushing are lower than they've ever been, and JP Morgan came out and said, look, it looks like, it says in just a few weeks, we may see the opposite scenario. So last year, the thing was full. It says no physical oil at all in the largest U.S. commercial storage facility, leading to what may be a super spike in the price of oil, as if we haven't had a big enough spike already. And I don't want to be negative, but this is the thing that's going on. There's a very interesting article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about in America, which is one of the leading agricultural producers in the world, about the fact that there's a collapse in the honeybee population, bumblebee or honeybee population. And there are a number of, I think there's 40 some kinds of bees, and several of them are critical or approaching critical, endangered, and vulnerable things. A lot of them are not in very good shape. This is a collapse, and they're required for pollination of crops. So this may lead to a decline in crop production. And so back to the title, we're having disruption upon disruption. Supply chains, supplies, shipping, and now we have, like at the source where they're producing food, there may be major problems looming with this. Well, Pope Francis came out this week in advance of this conference that's taking place in Glasgow, and essentially said you need to remember the 3 T's, and that's land, tierra, teco, trabajo, land, lodging, and labor. And so in this thing, it was really a conference that took place. It was called I think it's coming up here. This was the logo of the conference, Terra Domus Labor. It was the EMMP, or the WMPM, the World, well, I'm trying to remember, it was the World Popular Movement something. And he talked about it, and so what he did was he gave a speech, as he's prone to do, and it was pure Marxism. He talked about how everybody's coming together, we're going to work together, but we need to have a universal basic income. Now, that sounds like Marxism to me. They're going to make everybody equally miserable. And so the universal basic income, and I saw people talking about this on Twitter, and somebody says, UBI, universal basic income, that has nothing to do with Marxism or socialism. That's the other thing that I see, disruption upon disruption, is people can't even evaluate reality anymore. It's just absolutely insane. So, for example, here's to show you how things change. This is Merriam-Webster dictionary, and Andy, thanks for posting this the other day because I thought it was interesting. Definition of fetus: an unborn or unhatched vertebrate, especially after attaining the basic structural plan of its kind, specifically a developing human from usually 2 months after conception to birth. Now, I don't remember, I went back and looked, and it's been 2 months after conception for a while. I don't agree with this. I think we're fearfully and wonderfully made. And by the way, there are some developments that are taking place with regard to this Texas abortion law that has the pro-abortion people in just an absolute frenzy. The Supreme Court has refused to reinstate injunctions against the Texas abortion law. So now, which is a very creative way that they've done this. And so they're going to rule, they're going to expedite their ruling on the abortion cases in front of it, also including the Texas one. Everybody's that's pro-abortion is very upset by this, which is a good thing. But look at what happened in this definition of fetus in Merriam-Webster. So now, so they have always used examples of fetus in a sentence. Recent examples: Pfizer and Moderna didn't use cell lines derived from an aborted fetus to develop the vaccine, but did use human fetal cells to test the vaccine's efficacy. So now so of course everything has to be about this, the treatment for Charlie Vector 019er, or about Charlie Vector 019er, about lockdowns for Charlie Vector 019er. But this is what it said just in July. This is what the fetus definition at the Merriam-Webster dictionary site said. Recent examples on the web: every bit of food a woman eats nourishes the fetus, citing an article on August 23, 2021. So they've changed it. Years later, it says down here in a July 2021 article in USA Today, years later in Casey, the court allows states to ban most abortions at viability, the point at which a fetus can survive outside the womb, roughly 24 weeks. So now we have this thing for Charlie Vector 019er. I'm going to play a clip from Tucker Carlson where he interviews Mike Berry, who's an attorney for about 30 Navy SEALs who are not accepting or providing information to the military about the Charlie Vector 019. I want you to see what's happening here because I think we should all be troubled by this.
So the President of the United States recently kind of blithely announced that everybody in the United States military is going to get fully vaccinated. But hundreds of thousands of active duty American service members have refused so far for whatever reason, but they clearly mean it. They don't want it. They're some of the healthiest people in this country, but no one's healthier than the members of the U.S. Navy SEAL teams. And they're being forced to, or they're going to have to leave. Mike Berry is a Marine reservist. He's the general counsel at the First Liberty Institute. His group is representing more than 30 Navy SEALs who are objecting to vaccine mandates on religious grounds, which they thought were legitimate in a constitutional country. They're finding out otherwise. Mike Berry joins us tonight. Mike, thanks so much for coming on tonight. So what's the state of this? I think every American has an interest in knowing the country's going to be protected. The country's put so much into these SEAL teams, and the idea that a lot of these guys are going to be fired over this is a subject of concern for all of us. So where are they as of tonight?
Well, thanks for having me, Tucker. Yeah, just as you said, First Liberty Institute represents 40 U.S. Navy SEALs, one of our nation's most elite fighting forces. And right now, they're fighting for their careers and their livelihoods. And you would think that in this country, the Department of Defense would respect religious beliefs, but instead, the Navy is using religious beliefs as some sort of ideological litmus test to purge anybody who opposes the vaccine from our military. And that's un-American, and it actually really endangers our national security and our military readiness.
So that's kind of the point, right? So by forcing this, you get to find out who sincerely believes in God, and then you know their names at that point, and then you can expel them using the pretext of the COVID vaccine.
Well, I think that's exactly what's going on. I mean, I saw an article just today where the DOD said that the vast majority of people who have not yet been vaccinated haven't done so because they're going to be asking for a religious exemption. And so the DOD's come right out and said they don't intend on granting or approving any of those religious exemption requests across any of the branches. And the Navy has now said, yeah, and we're going to start punishing people for it. Our clients, these Navy SEALs, they've been told that even if their request is ultimately approved, they're going to be removed from the Navy SEAL community. Some of them have already been told to turn in their warfare devices. These are the pins that they wear in the uniform that they went through hell, is what they call it, in order to earn them. And now they're being told to turn it over because you're no longer capable of serving in the United States Navy or being a Navy SEAL, which is absolutely abhorrent. And they've been told that their family members, Their spouses and their children are not allowed to travel if they're not vaccinated. Since when does the DoD have authority or jurisdiction over family members? And then to really add injury to insult, the Navy has now come out and said that they can begin to seek recoupment for the training expenses that were spent on training these elite warriors. So, I mean, where does the madness stop?
Right. And where are Christian leaders? Where are the leaders of the Methodist or Lutheran or Episcopal denominations, Catholic Church? Why aren't they defending Christians who are being persecuted for their beliefs? And if you are a leader of one of those churches and you're not defending these guys and millions like them, why don't you go do something else? Why don't you work at Arby's or do something useful with your life?
Well, I think that's pretty clear.
So the President of the United States...
and this is interesting. This is an article from the Herald Sun in the state, I believe, of Victoria, where Melbourne is. Now, I get confused on Australia, like what's in New South Wales, what's in Victoria, who runs which, who's the premier of each of these different states. I think it's pretty clear that you have something along the lines of psychotic lunatics that are running the place down there. And they're big on, you've got to get the treatment. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. Melbourne has come out of the longest lockdown in the world, and I've heard that they may have another 27 or 29 days to go. People are all excited, but if you don't have the approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er, you're not doing anything. They don't care whether you can go shopping. You can't leave. You can't go from the state of Queensland to New South Wales if you don't have this treatment. This is a problem. Here's somebody sent me this, COVID pass in Lithuania and throughout Europe, and it is an incredibly thoughtful, well-written, well-researched, well-documented article where a man is writing about what's happened to his family. His wife has some severe medical conditions, which are contraindications for taking the treatment, a state-approved treatment, mandated treatment for Charlie Vector 019er, and they cannot get an exemption for her on grounds for that. She's also, I believe she might be pregnant, and people are concerned about that because, and so he's written this very long article about that, where they can work, where they can go. I mean, he says things, you cannot visit any cafes or restaurants, you cannot enter into any non-essential stores, you cannot enter any shopping center or large store, you cannot receive beauty services, you cannot use repair services, which last longer than 15 minutes. You cannot enter public indoor spaces, you can enter a fitness center, gym, or sauna. This is in the country of Lithuania. It's about 2.8 million people on the Baltic Sea, and it's just, you have to read about it. Now, let me say this. A couple of big companies have come out recently and said, okay, look, we know that our employees are upset by this mandate or requirement, so we're not really going to enforce it by firing them. That would include Southwest Airlines and I believe United Airlines or Delta, maybe Delta. I think Delta and Southwest are the ones that have done this. But listen, this is a temporary thing because there's really no federal rule for non-federal employees. Now they've drug in anybody. If you get any kind of federal money, you're going to be subject to the mandates that the Biden regime has put out. There's no OSHA rule requiring private employers to do this. That rule is going to come out. It's going to apply, they say, to employers that have 100 or more employees. And that's going to create, I just know how these things go. There's going to be whole law firm practice groups that increase because people are going to be asking advice about whether I'm subject to the rules or not. So OSHA has not released that rule yet. It's going through the approval process. It has to do a publication and request for comment before it becomes a rule. So I don't know how quickly it will be implemented. And if they're requiring several vaccine doses, I think they have to put it like 3 or 4 months out in the future because the vaccine doses, I don't know, have to be like 4 weeks apart for some of them. Some of them are different. And it all gets very confusing, and it's going to be a lot of work for lawyers and that type of thing. So we can always be grateful for that. But I'm going to read to you what was put on the OSHA website. Now, OSHA has a rule right now that if there are employer-mandated medical treatments and somebody has to get that as a condition of employment and there's an adverse reaction, they have to report that. This is true for all of the things that have been required for other diseases that people will get a treatment for to prevent that disease. Now this I pulled this morning off of the OSHA website. I'm going to read to you, probably won't comment on it, but I think it will be clear what's going on. So it's under a thing called, well, back to the Lithuania thing for just a moment. Here's a quote. At stores without police, workers handle the complaints. A representative for a major supermarket chain commented, there have been conflicts because some people aren't happy with the new rules. Workers checking the passes find it psychologically difficult to deal with all that negativity. Well, boo-hoo. So here's the OSHA website, and I have the URL up there if you want to go. It's frequently asked questions, #collapse-vaccine. Frequently asked questions, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Here's what it says, and I went down, that's a screenshot there of vaccine related. Here's what it says. Department of Labor and OSHA, as well as other federal agencies, are working diligently to encourage COVID-19 vaccinations. OSHA does not wish to have, this is what OSHA is saying, OSHA does not wish to have any appearance of discouraging workers from receiving COVID-19 vaccination, and also does not wish to disincentivize employers' vaccination efforts. As a result, OSHA will not enforce 29 CFR, that's the Code of Federal Regulations, 1904's recording requirements to require any employers to record worker side effects from COVID-19 vaccination at least through May 2022. We will reevaluate the agency's position at that time to determine the best course of action moving forward. So this is the world that we live in. I think it is obviously clear what OSHA is doing here. I feel like I live right in the middle of the novel 1984, which, as I have said before, is a horror story, not a user manual, but it's being used as a user manual by people in charge. Now, I apologize if you're going to be offended by the next. I want you to see, because now we're going to talk about a cultural phenomena that's going on where, and this is what happens. If we read Romans 1, we know that there are certain things that the Bible speaks against that people allow in their lives, and then they participate in them, and eventually a judgment comes on them, and the judgment is that they have lost the ability to reason. But understand that what has been going on for many, many years in schools and institutions, in churches that have been infiltrated by these people, is to tear down everything traditional, everything that functions. So, for example, here is the son of Kal-El, the son of Superman, now is coming out as bisexual. Now, I've not put in some of the things that I find even more troubling, pictures about that. But this is, you understand what's happening here is that this is for children. And understand that within the Marvel universe of people who are genetically modified, I believe that this has been a long setup for people to accept genetic modification. But here they're attacking at the heart of what people believe. And that's a Hezbollah article. If I don't get back to it, Hezbollah could fire as many as 2,500 rockets a day at Israel. There's a lot of things going forth. Also, water shortages in Iraq are just terrible. The river is drying up, the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers don't reach the ocean anymore. As a result, the ocean and the saline content is backing up into the marshes, and people are having to move because they're losing their livelihoods because they can no longer farm. So just remember that. But back to this thing about the attack on everything. This is a great article from the Federalist about, early this week. Abortion and transgenderism do have lots in common. Likewise, the most intense debates over transgenderism about children who have very limited abilities to understand the long-term consequences of their choices. People who advocate just letting children make the decision takes for granted that there are trans children who can be reliably identified and transitioned, but this belief is incompatible with the explosion of trans identification among minors, up as many as 9 in every 100 students in 2021, from below 1, well below 1. This increase is driven by social contagion and is alarming to even some trans-identified doctors who are starting to warn against rushing kids into dangerous, irreversible medical procedures. But then he goes on to talk about the fact that the same thing happens with abortion. We push, the culture pushes abortion, that there's nothing wrong with it, so why should we not have abortion? But what it really does is an attack on the wonderful creation that God made. And this is designed to undermine society. It's to get everybody off kilter. And it seems to be working. Now, about a week ago, I can't remember if I mentioned this or not, the UN Human Rights Organization has a special representative expert to deal with certain things. And so he came out with a report a little while ago called The Law of Inclusion and Practices of Exclusion, Reports on Gender. Essentially what they have done is they have come out and they said that any criticism of this, that would include questioning transitioning and for transgender people, questioning treatment, trying to put restrictions in place, and even criticism of sex ed courses in schools needs to be criminalized. Now, this is the UN organization, so understand that the UN, in conjunction with the Party of Davos, the World Economic Forum, and others, and Marxists and that type of thing, they're trying to tear everything down that you would hold to be traditional values. So you can see here, practices of exclusion. Here's listen, I'll just read the opening paragraph here as to what this report says. Opposition to the protection of gender identity and expression under the international human rights law is often framed as resisting the imposition of a so-called gender ideology, a concept that is symbolic vessel and to evoke a global conspiracy and deemed as a coordinated strategy aimed at destroying the political and social order. Oh, in other words, just what I just said. However, there is no single narrative of gender ideology, the concept of a malleable nature used to push for a variety of restrictive ideas and policies and to oppose different inclusionary human rights approaches. At its inception, the notion of gender ideology was created by religious leaders to halt advances regarding women's empowerment, as the proposals made during the Cairo and Beijing World Conferences in 1994 and 1995. These proposals were seen as an alleged danger for family models deemed as traditional. At the time, the concept of gender agenda was also emerged to reunite different topics of interest to conservative bases who wanted to offer resistance to sexual and reproductive rights, comprehensive sexuality education, and the rights of LGBT persons. And here it says, the alleged threat to the nation, family, and tradition. Anti-rights actors make strong parallels between the nation, family, and tradition. So you understand where they're doing this. They're going after everybody who holds these things, these values to be important. Another document that they have, it's called the Law of Inclusion. This is a report that was made to the UN General Assembly in June of 2021. This other report that I showed you came out in September. And in this, look at what one of these things says. The notion that there is a gender norm, a form which identifies and expressions vary or depart, is based on a series of preconceptions that must be challenged if all humankind is to enjoy human rights. Among these misconceptions is the idea that it is a legitimate societal objective that persons adopt roles, forms of expression, and behaviors that are considered entitlements or burdens according to their sex assigned at birth. Only by acknowledging the stereotypes, power asymmetries, equality, inequality, and fundamental violence that lies at the foundation of this system does the state comply with its obligation to address the violence and discrimination that it fuels. It's just, they have a big publication they put about conversion therapy and how we need to put into place so that any of this conversion therapy that, you is somebody who can declare themselves to be a particular gender or sexual identity or sexual proclivity, that it could be changed back to anything else. We cannot do that. So your gender can be changed, but what you decide on your orientation cannot. Do you understand how ridiculous this is? Interventions that act on the premise that there is something inherently evil in diverse sexual orientations and gender identities. Victims are usually submitted to the tenets of a spiritual advisor and subjected to programs. And I want you to, so they also go on here, all practices attempting conversion are inherently humiliating, demeaning, and discriminatory. And I thought I had so this is where this is going. Now in Colorado, there's another case. When Pam and I were there a few weeks ago, we stopped and saw Jack Phillips of Masterpiece Cake Shop. Support him. It's very expensive litigation. He's been involved in litigation now for 9 years. He's standing strong. He's a very strong Christian guy, has tremendous values. And my wife says I don't like oatmeal raisin cookies. I don't get the oatmeal or the raisin part of being in a cookie, but my wife said they were the best she ever had. But here's a case against a Colorado web designer now. And she is being sued by the same people that have gone after Jack Phillips. She does wedding websites. She has a very thriving business, and people are attacking her now saying, how dare you not put up a website for a same-sex wedding? So she was sued. She lost. They took it up on appeal to the Ninth Circuit in this case, 301 Creative, and she lost. What Colorado did in their law said you can't discriminate on this basis. You can't say, and you're religious, if you have religious views against it, too bad. The anti-discrimination part outweighs the religious freedom part, which would seem to be, so the Colorado law, we don't care about the First Amendment. It's unbelievable. And then what they also did was, they also said in Colorado, you cannot challenge, or you cannot put on your website why you don't want to do something that's against your religious values. So in other words, there's a permanent gag order put on this lady at 301 Creative about this. So here's an example of her website, and she had things, and she used to have this thing on here about, I love weddings. Each wedding is a story in itself, the story of a couple and their special love for each other. But she goes on to say is like why I can't do same-sex weddings because it goes against my values. But the state of Colorado says, we don't care what your values are. We don't care. You have to put your artistic expression and knowledge and everything to support what we deem to be a right superior to your right of free speech, which is in the First Amendment to the Constitution, but they don't care. And so when they took it up on appeal to the 10th Circuit, 9th or 10th Circuit, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in a 2-1 decision said, you lose. Now, it's been appealed to the Supreme Court. Pray that the Supreme Court takes the appeal. But in the dissent in the case, the one person who voted in favor of this website designer said he quoted from 1984 because he can see what's going on. So she has on there statement on the lawsuit, and she just gets, like Jack Phillips told us, the vitriol, vile threats and everything that are made against these people when they take a stand. It's just unbelievable. It's a mob mentality. So we got to destroy the person. Can't work to try to make the person see it our way. We just have to destroy. This is the mob mentality that I see happening all over the place. And so here in the decision, it says here, although we hold that religious speakers policy identified by appellants is not an exemption, the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act provides for 2 exemptions that warrant closer attention. First, the CADA exempts places that are principally used for religious purposes. Well, it's just a website design person, so it's not primarily a church, so she doesn't have an exemption. Because to them, religious thought exists completely independent of a person, even though they're pushing their own religion. Here's another, this is from the National Council on Family Relations. It says here, this is how people view, this is the National Council on Family Relations. Then you would think, well, that's sort of like a pro-family organization, right? Here's what they say, like white privilege, family privilege is an unacknowledged and unearned benefit instantiated in U.S. laws, policies, and practices and bestowed upon traditional or standard nuclear families to the disadvantage of non-traditional configured family systems. It's just absolutely unbelievable. Now, I want to go back, and I apologize for this as being out of place because it's just hard to get all of this thing coalesced. And if I'm doing anything else in my life, it's hard to get everything organized. Because my staff just isn't much help. I don't have a staff. I'm not much help to myself sometimes. But this is HR 5376. This is the big bill, like 3,000 pages long, that they want to do this $3.5 million stimulus package. But understand that buried in this bill, so I showed you earlier what OSHA is doing with its website, about not having to report things that happen with the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 0119, or that OSHA is going to require employers over 100 people to do. But also buried in that bill is this, adjustment of civil penalties for what? OSHA. And it says what used to be a $70,000 fine is now $700,000. What used to be $5,000 is now $50,000, and what's $7,000 is now $70,000. So what they're doing is they're increasing these fines and penalties by 10 times. It's designed to bankrupt companies. And I think it's also designed to identify religious people. So this is Sally Omarova. She is a Marxist. She's being challenged by Republicans. Amazingly, the paper she wrote in college, or thesis, at Moscow State University has somehow disappeared, and she doesn't have a copy, or she's not turning it over. So there's something going on. Barry Weiss, who I don't know that she's a religious Jewish practicing Jew, but she used to work for the New York Times. She was interviewed by Brian Stelter, and I want you to see a little bit of just a couple minutes of this interview because I think it's instructive as to where some of this is going. Do I have no sound?
You write, there are tens of millions of Americans who aren't on the hard left or the hard right who feel the world has gone mad. So in what ways has the world gone mad?
Well, when you have the chief reporter on the beat of COVID for the New York Times talking about how questioning or pursuing the question of the lab leak is racist, the world has gone mad. When you're not able to say out loud and in public that there are differences between men and women, the world has gone mad. When we're not allowed to acknowledge that rioting is rioting and it is bad, and that silence is not violence, but violence is violence, the world has gone mad. When we're not able to say that Hunter Biden's laptop is a story worth pursuing, the world has gone mad. When, in the name of progress, young school children, as young as kindergarten, are being separated in public schools because of their race, and that is called progress rather than segregation, the world has gone mad. There are dozens of examples that I could share with you and with your viewers. And you
often say,
everyone
allowed.
Sort of knows this, and
you say we're not allowed, we're not able.
Between,
who's the people stopping the conversation? Who are they?
People that work at networks, frankly, like the one I'm speaking on right now, who try and claim that You know, it was racist to investigate the lab leak theory. It was,
But
I mean,
who
let's
said
just
that
take
at
an
CNN?
example.
But I'm just saying that when you say allowed, I just think it's a provocative thing you say. You say we're not allowed to talk about these things, but they're all over the internet. I can Google them. I can
Brian,
find them
let's-
everywhere. I've heard about every story you
Of
mentioned.
course.
So I'm just suggesting, of course, people are allowed to cover whatever they want to cover.
But you and I both know, and it would be delusional to claim otherwise, that touching your finger to an increasing number of subjects that have been deemed third rail by the mainstream institutions and increasingly by some of the tech companies will lead to reputational damage, perhaps you losing your job, your children sometimes being demonized as well. And so what happens is a kind of internal self-censorship. This is something that I saw over and over again when I was at the New York Times.
Yeah, she's right. So you can find that Barry Weiss taking on. Here's just, I'm going to play a couple minutes of this clip. This was a discussion also on CNN about what's going on with school boards and what the government is doing. And I'm increasingly, we're on sort of a time limit today. So here's this. So here we go.
I'm not going to let parents come into schools and actually take books out and make their own decision. I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach.
That's Terry McAuliffe running for governor
Virginia's
of
Democratic
Virginia.
gubernatorial candidate Terry McAuliffe criticized over his comments about what should be taught in schools and saying that parents should stay out of it. This comes as heated debates continue at local school board meetings across the country about whether public schools should teach critical race theory, which is a legal theory that recognizes that systemic racism is part of American society and challenges the beliefs that allow it to flourish. Let's talk about this with people who are affected by this discussion. A Virginia mom against critical race theory teaching in school, Asra Nomani, and also with us is a Texas parent in favor of critical race theory being taught in schools, Kazike Prince. I want to thank both of you for coming on, for this is such an important discussion that we're having. And look, I know that you both agree that parents should have a say, right? That they should have a say in what their kids are being taught. You differ on what schools should teach. So Asra, to you first, what do you think schools should not be teaching?
So schools should absolutely be teaching reading, writing, arithmetic. They should not be radicalizing our kids. And unfortunately, schools are now radicalizing our kids. I mean, this is the volume of the book from critical race theory that, as people say, teach in law schools. But unfortunately, it is now trickling down into little books for children like Woke Baby, Gender Queer, which is the book that actually inspired this mom to speak in the school board meeting in Fairfax County, to which Terry McAuliffe responded. In it, there is unfortunately very graphic symbol of pedophilia and pornography.
Can I ask you though, why do you draw a line from one to the other? Because I have gone through critical race theory. I don't know that there's a direct line. Why do you think that there is?
So just look at this idea that is in Not My Idea. And it literally says here, whiteness is a bad deal. And it has a symbol of Satan. And this is the contract that they say whiteness brings. And children are getting this book. And so there is a direct correlation from these ideas to these dangerous principles. And I fit into the intersectional world. I'm a Muslim, I'm an immigrant, I'm a mom of color, I am a single mom, but yet I deny all of these, privileges in the new paradigm of the oppression matrix.
And so the guy then came on from Austin, Texas, and said, well, we don't teach critical race theory. So Christopher Rufo went out in his blog and he put in, these are educational books that are being used by teachers and also available in libraries and also being taught to students. They're lying. They're gaslighting us. Well, you see this going on. So remember the thing that happened about the National School Board Association. They wrote this letter to the Biden administration. Boy, we need to investigate these acts of violence and that sort of thing. That led to the Attorney General issuing this memorandum saying, we need to investigate this. I'm going to put the FBI on it. He then went to Congress this week. The interesting thing is, though, that the National School Board Association, they got a lot of heat from their members. We don't like this. You didn't ask for our approval. Why did you send this letter out and make it public without our approval? Some state associations are withdrawing from that. Well, like a lot of organizations, money talks. So they're losing the dues from these state school board associations, have withdrawn their support of the National School Boards Association. So the National School Board Association came out and said, we regret and apologize for the letter that we sent the Obama administration. Here's Merrick Garland being questioned about this at Congress this week.
There's been a disturbing spike in harassment, intimidation, threats of violence.
Yes.
When did you first review the data showing this so-called disturbing uptick?
So I read the letter, and we have been seeing over time threats.
Whoa. I didn't ask you. So you read the letter. That's your source?
So let me be clear. This is not a prosecution or an
Is there some study, some effort, some investigation someone did that said there's been a disturbing uptick, or you just take the words of the National School Board Association?
Well, the National School Board Association, which represents thousands of school boards and school board members, says that there are these kind of threats. When we read in the newspapers reports of threats of violence, when that is in the context of threats of violence.
The source for this, for the
Well, so 20 state school boards have distanced themselves from the National School Boards Association. And then this lady that you saw on the CNN thing, she got a Freedom of Information Act request, and it included an email. This is an email that came from the interim head of the National School Boards Association in exchange with a guy that works for the Ohio School Board Association. And it says this, that additionally, in talks over the last several weeks, this was written before the letter came out from NSBA, and it was before Merrick Garland made his thing. It says here, and additionally, in talks over the last several weeks with White House staff, they requested additional information on some of the specific threats, so the letter details many of the incidents that have been occurring. This is this Attorney General guy. I'm grateful that he's not on the Supreme Court, and he should resign immediately. He has his son-in-law has a financial interest in this. It's corruption on an epic scale, and they're making it up. So look, I don't have the time because we're having communion today, so I need to move on. But just one quick thing about the Middle East. You need to understand, Hezbollah came out this week. There have been some attacks here and there. There's a lot of things going on. But the leader, Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, came out and said, we have 100,000 fighters under our control. That's bigger than the Lebanese army. Now, I don't know if they have that many. It might be more like 50,000, but it's a significant thing. And what he was trying to do was trying to intimidate others in Lebanon that we're in charge. He also said, listen, Israel, we have this dispute over the maritime borders where you're going to be drilling for oil and gas. We'll attack you if we have to over that. Don't you dare try to get into the disputed areas. The other interesting thing on that side, too, is that Israel has found that the revenue that they expected to be getting from their gas production is about 6% of what they projected. So that's kind of the thing we have to look at. Putin and Naftali met for 5 hours on Friday, and they're talking about still having the deconfliction zone. So I'm going to have to try to do something middle of the week. Here's the story on Naftali Bennett. They agree to continue deconfliction policy on Syrian airstrikes. This is a big deal. Russia withdrew their support from some militia groups trying to integrate everybody into the Syrian army. And the concern there is it was in the area of Dara, along the Golan Heights, along the southern Jordan-Syrian border where the Syrian civil war started in 2011. Russia's kind of pulling back from there, and the concern is Iran's going to come up and fill the void. So there's a lot of things. I think I have about 3 hours worth of stuff to go over. I want you to continue to watch for two major things: huge conflict with China. China's in major economic concerns right now. I think they might start a war. That would be over Taiwan. We're not necessarily in the best position, particularly if hundreds of thousands of U.S. military members are told to take a hike because they don't want the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er. That is concerning. And then this whole thing about artificial intelligence. I'll be talking more about that over the next few weeks. Transhumanism and what's going on among tech elites. It's a religion, it's a cult, and they think they're going to create their own God. So a lot of things going on. Listen, Ephesians 6, armor up. Put on the whole armor of God. Go read Ephesians 6. This is a spiritual battle that we are in. This is a spiritual battle that will exist until the Lord returns. It is not going to change. It's always been there, but it's intensified. You can feel it if you're paying attention. But understand, God is in control. And this is a perfect opportunity to share the gospel with people. So let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for the day. Thank you for the gospel. Pray, Lord, that you will lead us by your Spirit in the days and weeks to come. Bless us today in Jesus' name. Amen.